It was almost midnight when the call came through. The kitchen was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in after a long, greasy shift. The fryers were shut down, the steel counters wiped clean, and the last of the dishes were drying in tall racks near the back wall. Most of the crew had either clocked out or moved in slow silence, counting down the minutes until they could do the same. But Imani Carter didn't move like she was just waiting for the night to end. She was wiping down the prep station when her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She almost didn't answer it. Personal calls were technically against policy, even at this hour. But when she saw the Tokyo area code flash across the screen, her heart skipped. It had to be them, the scholarship committee she'd written to nearly a year ago. The one that offered an advanced fellowship in cross-cultural relations. She had sent in her essays, her transcripts, her story. And then she had waited. Quietly, almost giving up. She stepped toward the back hallway, where no one could hear her clearly, and took the call. And just like that, something in her shifted. Her voice changed, her posture straightened. She began speaking in fluent Japanese, clear, confident, full of energy that didn't match the stained apron around her waist or the bleach bucket by her side. She answered questions with ease, even smiled while speaking. She talked about her interest in diplomacy, about growing up with 5 languages spoken around her dinner table, about why understanding people, not just policy, was her lifelong passion. She didn't notice the figure standing just outside the kitchen doors. Elliot Grant had been on his way to the loading dock, reviewing incident reports on his phone, when he paused. Something about the rhythm of her voice pulled him out of his scroll. Not the words, they were in a language he didn't speak, but the tone, measured, graceful, assured. He stepped back quietly, standing in the corridor like a man who had just overheard a ghost, because the voice didn't match the uniform. It didn't belong to someone scrubbing down a prep table at midnight. It belonged to someone he should have met in a conference room, someone who could have been sitting across from him in an executive board meeting. He didn't know her name, but something told him he was about to. Imani didn't think anything of the call after it ended. She went right back to scrubbing the stovetops, wiping down the walk-in fridge door, tossing out the soggy cardboard boxes that no one else ever seemed to touch. By the time her shift ended, the Japanese conversation already felt like a half-dream. One of those fleeting moments you carry with you for a few minutes before it fades under the weight of everything else. She didn't expect anyone to have heard it, but someone did. The next evening, just minutes after she clocked in, her supervisor called her into the back office. Mr. Richards was the kind of manager who smiled with his mouth, never with his eyes. He always looked like he was doing someone else a favour by existing, and tonight he was holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. "You took a personal call on the job," he said flatly, not even bothering with a greeting. Imani opened her mouth to explain, to mention the scholarship, to say it lasted 6 minutes, tops, but he was already shaking his head. "I don't care what language it was in," he continued. "This is a professional environment. You don't get to bend the rules just because you know fancy words." There was a strange twist in his voice when he said that. Like her intelligence wasn't just inconvenient, it was threatening. Before she could say another word, he reassigned her. Effective immediately, she'd be working sanitation in the guest bathrooms. Same hours, same pay, less dignity. "It's not permanent," he added, scribbling something on the clipboard. "But maybe next time you'll remember what your job is." Imani nodded once. That was the rule. No arguing, no making a scene. Just nod, do the work, and don't give anyone a reason to look at you too long. Except if someone already had. Later that night, while restocking the bathroom stalls with toilet paper and tiny soaps, she thought about how easily brilliance could be mistaken for arrogance. How quickly a gift could be turned into a problem just because of who it came from. She was fluent in 6 languages. She had a degree from a top university. She was working overnight shifts cleaning other people's messes because that was the only job that called her back. And even then, speaking the wrong language in the wrong place was enough to be punished. She didn't cry, she didn't rant, she just kept moving. But what she didn't know was that someone else had started moving too. The next few nights passed like usual. No one said anything. No one looked her in the eye. In a place full of people, Imani felt more invisible than ever. The only thing that changed was the uniform. Her white apron was swapped for a grey housekeeping vest, and instead of kitchen steam and clattering pans, her world became marble sinks and bleach. Still, she didn't complain. She cleaned, quietly, carefully. She folded the ends of toilet paper rolls into neat triangles, even when no one would notice. She scrubbed mirrors until they reflected more than just her tired face. She kept showing up because that's what her mother always taught her, even when it's unfair, especially then. It was 5 days after the call when the front desk radioed for her. Housekeeping to HR, Carter, Imani, repeat Carter, Imani to HR. Her heart sank. She'd been expecting this. Richards had probably filed a report. Maybe she was being let go. Maybe someone finally decided her resume didn't match her mop. She didn't say a word on the elevator ride up. She smoothed her vest, tucked a stray curl behind her ear, and prepared herself for whatever was coming. But when the doors opened, it wasn't Richards waiting for her. It was a woman in a navy suit with warm eyes and a printed folder in her hands. "Miss Carter, right this way." Imani blinked, surprised by the tone. Polite, professional, almost respectful. She followed the woman into a quiet meeting room. There were no cleaning carts here. No lingering smells of disinfectant. Just a long glass table, polished chairs, and a single cup of coffee placed neatly on a coaster. Across the table sat a man she had never seen in person but recognised immediately, Elliot Grant. The man whose name was on every employee handbook, whose photo hung in the lobby downstairs, right next to a wall-sized mission statement, founder, chairman, the kind of man whose shoes never touched the kitchen floor. He looked up when she walked in and smiled, not the fake kind. The kind that made her feel like for the first time in a very long time someone saw her. "Imani Carter," he said slowly, like he already knew the answer. "Tell me something. How long have you worked here?" She hesitated, still standing. "Almost a year. And before that?" "I worked nights at 2 different restaurants while finishing my degree, Georgetown." His eyebrows lifted. "You speak Japanese fluently?" "And 5 other languages," she said, because if this was going to be a strange day, she might as well own it. He leaned back in his chair, studying her like a puzzle he hadn't expected to find in the building he built. "I heard you," he said simply, "that night, in the kitchen." Imani froze. "I was just taking a call." "I know," he said gently. "That's not the problem. That's why you're here." And before she could figure out what that meant, he slid a folder toward her. Inside was a list, names, schedules, a note at the top that read, "Candidate, internal consideration, Dutch-Japanese trade event." She didn't understand. Not yet. But the door that had always seemed bolted shut, it had just creaked open. Imani didn't speak for a moment. She stared at the folder on the table, her eyes moving across the typed lines and highlighted names. Translators, logistics leads, diplomatic liaisons. And at the very bottom, under the section labelled Language and Cultural Advisors, Internal Pool, was her name. Imani Carter. It looked wrong. Not because it didn't belong there, but because no one had ever put it there before. She looked up slowly. "I think there's been a mistake," she said carefully, her voice just above a whisper. Elliot Grant shook his head. "No mistake," he replied. "I asked for this list, and I asked for you to be on it." Imani blinked. "But I clean bathrooms." "You do," he said, not flinching. "And apparently you speak 6 languages and hold a degree in international policy. You're the first person I've met this week who actually understands the cultural nuances between Japanese and Dutch diplomacy." She didn't know how to respond to that, so he kept going. "There's a trade event next month, Dutch and Japanese delegates, 3 days of meetings, high stakes, high expectations. We're hosting it, and we're behind on everything, especially communication." He folded his hands on the table. "I don't need someone perfect. I need someone who won't embarrass us. Someone smart, humble, quietly brilliant. You seemed like a good place to start." Her throat felt dry. This didn't sound like a dream come true. It sounded like a test she didn't ask for. "I'm not qualified," she said, her words tangled between fear and fact. "I've never done anything like this before." He nodded. "That's fair. So let's start with something you have done before. I want you to review some translations for me. Real ones. Tell me what's wrong, what's right, and what we need to fix." "And if I mess up?" He smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just plainly. "Then we go back to the list." Imani sat back in her chair. She could say no, walk out, get back to her cart and her bleach bottles and finish her shift. No one would think less of her, because no one was thinking of her at all. But her mother once told her that fear is just a room. Sometimes you walk around it, sometimes you sit in it, and sometimes you open the door. Imani looked him in the eye. I'll do it. Imani spent the next 2 nights hunched over documents in the back corner of the staff lounge, right next to the vending machine that was always out of Diet Coke. She kept her cleaning shifts, didn't tell anyone what she was doing, and didn't dare ask for time off. Not yet. Elliot had given her access to the internal folder system for the upcoming trade event. She didn't get a title, or a badge, or even a proper desk, just a login, and trust. That was enough. She started with the Japanese memos first. Some were fine, stiff, but technically correct. Others were off, not just awkward, but careless. Phrases that might seem small to a non-native speaker, but in diplomatic circles could cause confusion or offence. And then she opened the Dutch files. They were worse, like they'd been run through a free translation site, skimmed once, then sent to print. One entire paragraph, read like someone had copied a recipe for meatballs instead of a protocol memo. Imani furrowed her brow. She clicked through the metadata. Every document came from the same source folder, same submission ID, all traced back to one person, a freelancer listed as an external certified translator. But something didn't feel right. She ran a background search on the name. No official certifications, no listings on the National Translator Registry, just a personal blog about yoga retreats in Spain and a side gig as a language enthusiast. That's when she saw the invoice. $14,000 for 3 weeks of translation work. Imani leaned back in her chair, the air suddenly tight in her chest. That kind of rate wasn't just high, it was suspicious, especially when the work was this sloppy. She kept digging, found another folder and another invoice, the same name, same handwriting, different email. And one more thing, an internal memo, buried in the approval logs, signed by Marcus Whitmore, Director of Operations, the same man who never looked her in the eye when she passed him in the hallway, the same man who once told another employee, half joking, that he didn't trust people who used big words when small ones would do. Imani closed her laptop slowly. This wasn't just a case of bad translation, it was a pattern. Someone had been funneling money to an unqualified contact, approving their work without review, and letting that work represent the hotel on an international stage. And if she hadn't been asked to check it, no one would have noticed. Or maybe no one was supposed to. Imani sat on the edge of her twin bed that night, the laptop still open beside her, glowing softly in the dark. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she couldn't bring herself to type anything yet. The hotel was quiet. Outside her window, the Chicago skyline blinked like it always did, distant, dazzling, and a little out of reach. She had all the proof, the fake credentials, the bloated invoices, the poor translations that could have caused real damage if left unchecked, and worst of all, the internal approvals. It wasn't a mistake, it was a pattern, one that had been going on long before she ever answered that call in Japanese. But still she hesitated, because she knew how these things worked. People didn't like whistleblowers, especially not ones wearing housekeeping uniforms, especially not black women without the right last name or title on their badge. Even with the truth on her side, the blowback could land on her first. She thought about the women in her family, her grandmother who cleaned homes in Baltimore until her hands gave out, her aunt who worked 2 jobs and still got passed over for promotions by people she trained, her mother, her mother, who raised Imani to speak boldly in every language she knew, but who also taught her when to be careful. This world, her mother once said, wasn't built to hear us, so when they do, make sure it's worth the noise. Imani closed the laptop. She didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she showed up to her shift like always. Same uniform, same hallways. But something in her had settled, like a decision had already been made, even if she hadn't spoken it out loud yet. She printed the documents, she made a folder, and then she walked past the kitchen, past the staff elevators and up to the executive offices. She didn't make an appointment, she didn't ask permission. She knocked once on Elliot Grant's office door and waited. He looked up from his desk, surprised. "Ms. Carter?" She stepped in slowly, holding the folder against her chest like a shield. "There's something you need to see," she said quietly. He didn't speak right away, just gestured for her to sit and took the folder from her hands. As he flipped through the pages, his face shifted, from curious to still to something colder. Not angry at her, but at what he was reading. When he finished, he looked up. "How long have you known?" 3 days, she said, "but it's probably been going on longer than that." "And you're sure?" Imani met his eyes, steady, certain. "I double-checked every file myself, and I looked into the translator. She's not certified. She's related to someone here." Elliot didn't ask who. He already knew. He closed the folder, exhaled once through his nose, then leaned back in his chair like the weight of it all had just landed. "You understand what this means," he said. "This isn't just about translations anymore." "I know. You could lose your job." "I know that too." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded just once. "All right," he said, "let's deal with it." And just like that, the silence they had always counted on was gone. The boardroom smelled like fresh coffee and something colder, like air conditioning turned up too high, or nerves trying to stay professional. Imani sat at the far end of the long, polished table. She wasn't supposed to be there. Everyone knew it. Even the woman who handed her a water bottle at the door gave her that polite, confused smile that said, "Are you lost?" But Elliot Grant had insisted. He wanted her in the room. And now, here she was, wearing her one nice blouse, a blazer borrowed from a cousin who worked reception, and a calm she had to fight for with every breath. Across from her sat Marcus Whitmore, director of operations, crisp suit, gold watch, the kind of practiced smile that came from years of not getting caught. He barely glanced at her. Elliot stood at the head of the table, flipping through the folder Imani had given him days before. Every page was backed by a digital copy, every line cross-checked, every name verified. "This isn't about one bad translator," Elliot began. "It's about a process that's been broken for months, maybe longer. Work outsourced to unqualified people. Payments approved without oversight, and the consequences could have been international." Whitmore shifted in his seat. "With all due respect," he said smoothly, "these decisions were made under extreme time constraints. We needed someone fast. We did the best we could with what we had." Imani spoke before she realised she was going to. "You had me." The room turned. Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. "You had someone on staff with the degrees, the language skills, the experience. You just never looked." Whitmore laughed just once, dry, annoyed. "You expect us to believe you were qualified and no one noticed? That's convenient." Imani didn't blink. "I sent in applications twice, no callback. I asked to shadow the international events team. I was told I wasn't a culture fit." She paused, not to cry, not to break, just to let the silence say what she didn't have to. Elliot looked around the table. "I did notice," he said, "eventually, and that's the point, isn't it? That someone this capable had to be overheard speaking Japanese in a kitchen before anyone realised she didn't belong scrubbing floors." He tapped the folder once. "We're going to fix this, today." There were no protests after that, just the quiet scribble of notes, a few red faces, and a board full of people realising that whatever was normal might not survive the afternoon. By the end of the meeting, Whitmore was suspended pending further review. An investigation was launched, and Richards, the same manager who demoted Imani over a phone call, was asked to step aside while HR reopened several internal hiring records. Imani didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just sat there, hands folded in her lap, and waited until it was over. Because sometimes justice doesn't feel like a movie moment. Sometimes it just feels like finally being heard. For a few days, the hotel buzzed like someone had flipped a switch. People talked. Whispers in break rooms, side glances in elevators. Housekeeping staff suddenly getting polite nods from executives who had never learned their names. Imani didn't bask in it. She still showed up early, still wore the same black sneakers, still brought her own lunch in a brown paper bag. The only difference was the badge clipped to her jacket now. Temporary assignment, international events support. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't permanent, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like a step that led somewhere. Then one morning she was called into HR again, but this time it wasn't to explain herself. Elliot met her there. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a sweater and slacks, like someone who had stayed up too late thinking. "I've been doing a lot of reading," he said, motioning for her to sit. "About internal pipelines, about the people we miss." Imani raised an eyebrow. And it turns out we've been sitting on a gold mine." He slid a thick report across the table. It was a staff audit. Names, roles, backgrounds, dozens of them. People like Imani, fluent in multiple languages with degrees in everything from economics to engineering. People working valet, laundry, security, all overlooked, all underused. 147 employees, Elliot said, over 80% from minority backgrounds, all underleveraged, all stuck. Imani ran her hand over the pages slowly. These people, he continued, don't need handouts. They need pathways, visibility, trust. He paused. I want you to help me build that. She looked up. Build what? A program, he said simply. Talent discovery, internal growth, real promotion pipelines, and I want you at the centre of it. Imani blinked. You want me to run it? I want you to shape it. You know what it's like to be invisible here. Now I want you to help us fix it. She didn't say yes right away, not because she didn't want it, but because saying yes meant believing that what had happened wasn't a fluke, that her voice mattered not just in that boardroom, but in rooms yet to come. Finally she nodded. I'll do it, but I want it done right. No checkboxes, no headlines. Agreed. And I don't want a pity promotion. I want the tools, the time, the team. Elliot smiled. You'll have them. Imani looked down at the report again. It didn't feel like power. It felt like responsibility. And that felt even better. 3 months later, the hotel didn't look that different from the outside. The lobby still gleamed. Guests still sipped overpriced lattes in velvet chairs. Bellhops still rushed past with rolling carts and crisp greetings. But something had shifted beneath the surface. Something quiet, but real. Imani now worked from an office tucked between HR and finance. Nothing fancy. One window, one plant, a second-hand desk. But every morning she unlocked the door like it was something sacred. Because this wasn't about her anymore. It was about the others. The ones who had sat in silence for years. Who'd stopped updating their resumes because hope was too expensive. Who had swallowed their fluency, their degrees, their brilliance, just to keep their paychecks. They started showing up, one by one. A night security guard who spoke fluent Mandarin and used to be a high school teacher back in Queens. A woman from housekeeping with an MBA she'd earned online while raising 3 kids. A valet driver who once ran logistics for a refugee program in Syria. Imani didn't fix their lives, that wasn't her job. What she did was listen, recommend, connect. She created a mentorship track. Paired entry-level staff with senior managers who were willing to learn, not just teach. She rewrote internal job postings in plain language. She convinced upper management to allow skill-based interviews instead of just paper credentials. And she made sure no one sat in those meetings alone the way she once did. Change didn't come in big announcements. It came in late-night emails, in quiet nods across the hallway, in staff meeting slides that, for the first time, showed names like Fatima and Darnell and Thui in leadership brackets. It wasn't perfect. There were skeptics, eye rolls, a few side comments about diversity hires and lowering the bar. But those were getting quieter too, because results spoke louder. Under Imani's pilot program, internal promotions rose, retention improved, productivity went up, and the stories started to pour in. One woman cried in the hallway after being moved to a position that finally used her degree. A former bellhop now led vendor negotiations and saved the company 6 figures in a month. And sometimes Imani would stay late, just sitting at her desk, rereading the emails people sent her. Not because she needed praise, but because she needed to remember that this wasn't just paperwork, it was proof. She thought about her mother a lot in those moments. The way she used to say, if no one opens the door for you, baby, then you open it yourself, and don't you dare close it behind you. Imani wasn't just opening doors anymore. She was holding them wide. The email came on a Thursday morning. Imani was sipping weak coffee from a chipped mug, going through reports from the mentorship program, when she saw it sitting in her inbox, flagged, formal and unexpected. Subject, visiting fellowship, invitation, Amsterdam Institute of Global Affairs. She blinked, read it twice. The institute had been following her work. Not just the headlines from the boardroom months ago, but what had come after. The internal growth program, the ripple effect, the quiet way she was changing how one company looked at talent, equity and opportunity. They wanted her to come speak, share her story, and maybe even guest teach a short course the following spring. She stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like it was waiting for her to believe it. She didn't forward the email to anyone right away. She didn't post it online. She just sat with it, hands wrapped around her mug, heart a little heavier than she expected. Not because she was afraid, but because she wished her mum had lived to see this. Imani closed the laptop, walked down to the break room, stood there for a minute just watching people talk, laugh, move past each other like they always had. Except now things were different. She passed by a young woman from laundry who had just been promoted to front desk supervisor, a janitor who now handled weekend logistics, a barista who was mentoring new hires in 3 languages. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't fast, but it was real. Later that week, Elliot called her into his office again. This time, there was no folder, just a simple announcement. Starting next quarter, he said, we're restructuring internal communications and global training, and we want you to lead both. She raised an eyebrow. What's the title? Vice President, Diversity and International Relations. Imani didn't smile right away. Not because she wasn't honoured, but because she already knew the real win wasn't in the title. It was in every life that got a little closer to being seen. She accepted, of course. But before she left his office, she asked for one more thing. A scholarship fund, she said, for overlooked talent. People who don't get second looks because of their zip code, their accent, their uniform. I want to name it after my mother. Elliot didn't hesitate. Done. And so months later, on a crisp spring morning, Imani stood at a podium in front of a small crowd gathered in the hotel atrium. No fancy spotlight, no big speech. Just a plaque. Simple. Clean. The Teresa Carter Rising Voices Fund. For those who were never supposed to be in the room, but showed up anyway. Imani looked around. She wasn't cleaning tables anymore. She was building them. Honestly, I loved it. It's quiet, but powerful. No over-the-top drama, no fairy tale promotions. Just a real woman with real talent, finally being seen. Imani feels like someone I'd root for in real life. The story doesn't scream for attention, but it holds you. And that moment she said, "You had me." That hit hard. No anger, just truth. What I admire most is the ending. No fireworks, just impact. A small office, a scholarship named after her mum, a ripple turning into something bigger. If this becomes a video, I think people won't just watch it, they'll remember it. It's not flashy, it's meaningful. You did something really good here. Thank you for staying with us all the way until now. If this story meant something to you, even just a little, we'd love if you gave it a like, subscribed, or left a comment below. Every voice matters here. See you in the next story, right here on Rain Inside.